One of my favorite times of the year is the high water season. And that's why we're going to tie the UV Scud, because it's a must-have during those times of year when the flow is coming up, which typically takes place in May and June on the South Platte and in a lot of your western tail races. A Scud is one of those flies that you can't live without. I typically tie them in sizes 12 through 18 in orange, tan, and olive. I've clamped a TM code 2457 into my vise, and we'll begin with a jam knot behind the eye of the hook here. I'm going to tie the orange UV Scud this evening. So we're going to use a 6/0 Danville thread and advance the thread back towards hook bend as a little bit of a thread base or underbody, so to speak here. Now this is tied a little different than your traditional fly in the fact that the tail is actually going to be towards the eye of the hook, and the actual front of the Scud is going to be towards hook bend. We're going to secure some orange poly right at hook bend, and then we'll advance the thread forward towards the eye of the hook, and then come back and just make sure that's all tied down secure. Leave our thread back at hook bend. I'm going to take a little piece of plastic, a plastic strip that they cut with a razor blade out of actually a Ziploc bag. And I'm going to secure that into place right in front of hook bend. And then the final thing that we should be concerned with is a piece of 4X tippet material for the rib on this pattern. So we'll tie that in once again in the same location as the baggy back. Then we'll take some UV shrimp pink ice dub, and I use olive and tan again in the UV, because if you look at the natural Scuds, particularly the olive ones, they have a UV sheen to them. And so you can capture that little bit of UV sheen with this dubbing. So your olive Scuds are your living Scuds. If you were to seine the river, you would get the olive Scuds, the Grimaire Scuds. And the dead Scuds are orange, and then Scuds that are molting are typically tan. So I carry 3 different color schemes of those, again in sizes 12 through 18. We'll put a little bit of this dubbing on now. This dubbing is a little bit trickier to work with in comparison to like fine and dry type dubbings. So don't be too concerned about the dubbing noodle being a little bit thicker than you're accustomed to working with. It's not a problem, because we're going to need to pull this dubbing down for the legs. So I'm going to dub this in a couple different layers, starting at the bend of the hook and then dubbing back towards the eye of the hook. And then what I want to do is try to develop a slight taper from the bend of the hook down towards the eye. If you look at a Scud, they're a little bit thicker towards the front end of their bodies in comparison to the rear end of their abdomen. So what I can do here is just build that up, get a slight taper. I'm going to pull the baggy strip over the top. Oh, I got ahead of myself there. I need to pull these legs down. So we're going to take a dubbing brush here and pull down those legs on both sides of the Scud. And then I'll use my thumb and my index finger to comb those down. Then I'm going to pull the baggie strip over. Take a couple material locking wraps to hold that into place. Snip off that material, and then I'm going to take my tippet material here. I'm not going to reverse rib this, but I'm going to actually wrap in a clockwise direction. And you got to try to cut through all those fibers. Use your finger to kind of comb those down. And I put a fair amount of tension on that. I want to sink that rib right into that baggy back to create that crustacean look, that segmented effect. And we'll just palmer this tippet material forward. And don't worry about if you get some of that dubbing material trapped in there, because we're going to come back in at the end here and use a bodkin and pull those legs back down. So we'll take a few wraps here, trim off our material there, and then we'll make a nice little head, and we'll whip finish. Trim our thread. I'm going to come in, I'm going to trim the antenna, and then we'll come back and we'll trim the tail. Then I'll typically use my thumb and flare that tail out just a bit. And we'll come back in with our bodkin here, and we'll pull those legs down, the fibers that we trapped when we were ribbing. That's an easy fix. Don't get too worked up, like I said, about it. You can just pull those right out very easily. And then once again, I'm going to pull that down. Then I'm going to trim the fibers straight across with the hook shank, and then from the point of the hook up, I'll trim those fibers off there. So we'll kind of do a couple different cuts there. Give you a look at that top side of it, but you can also see how nicely those legs pull down. Typically use this as my lead fly in a tandem nymphing rig during the high water season, and then I'll trail a couple flies that would match the prevailing hatches at that particular time. Usually we're on the backside of Baetis, but some Baetis are good options at that point in time too, and potentially maybe some caddis that time of year as well. So with the UV Scud and those three different colors is one of my top guide flies, no doubt, and especially in that high water season in May and June. We're on the backside of the spawn, so a lot of times trout are still looking for eggs, and the trout spawn really late in Cheeseman because the water is so cold. So it's not uncommon to see rainbows on reds clear into the end of June. So they'll eat this as an egg pattern sometimes, but they'll also eat it as a scud. So it's a very, very versatile fly for that particular time of year. So you should tie a few of these up. I think you'll be happy you did. It's one of those patterns that when fish get on scuds, they really look for them because it's a very high protein diet.